For a firm that wants to maximize profit, their profit maximizing condition is to produce a level of output, that is a quantity, a Q, where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. So we've got two ideas that we want to review: marginal revenue and marginal cost. Marginal cost is something that we saw earlier. The marginal cost curve tells me the cost of producing all these additional units. So again, the nice way to think about that, if I take Q equals 1, that marginal cost tells me that's the cost of that first unit. Q equals 2, marginal cost is the cost of that second unit, and the third unit, and the fourth unit, and the fifth unit, and the sixth unit, and the 10th unit, and the 100th unit. The marginal cost curve tells me, unit by unit, what are the cost of all these additional units. The other side of the story has to do with marginal revenue. But before we get to that, we want to talk about a firm that's operating in a perfectly competitive market. Right? So notice that I'm differentiating between what goes on with an individual firm and what goes on in a competitive market. We've looked at markets before. That's where we have our demand and supply. Remember that the demand curve is the market demand. It represents what all buyers in a market would like to do. For given prices, how many units do all consumers collectively as a group want to purchase? The supply curve tells me, again, on a market level, what's going on. It tells me in the aggregate, in total, for all the producers at a given level of price, what's the total amount that they are going to supply to the market. So we've got this story about a competitive market. That's really the story of supply and demand that we've been looking at earlier in this class. And we said that where supply and demand intersect, we've got two different market outcomes that we can focus on, right? Are where supply and demand intersect, half of the story is a price story, right? P star is the price that makes our market clear, that produces neither a shortage or a surplus. And the other side of the story, the other market outcome, is our Q star friend, right? Remember, our Q star is the total amount of goods and services that are bought in a given market. We want to make sure we're totally clear on the difference between market and firm, so we gotta remember market corresponds to P star and Q star. This Q in this market represents the total amount that's purchased for all firms, by all firms in the market, right? So that would be all automobiles that are purchased, all fast food that's purchased, all hospital services that are purchased. That's different from when we turn and we ask, how should an individual firm that operates in this market behave? On the left, when we were talking about this marginal cost curve, we want to think about this as being, this is the cost for a given firm of producing each of their additional units. So horizontally, what are we measuring here with this firm? We're still measuring quantity, but we got to just make sure that we know that those are two different Qs that we're talking about. On the right, with the market, that is the total quantity of all firms in the market. On the left, we're just focusing on one individual firm. That's the quantity that that one individual firm should produce. When we talk about a perfectly competitive market, if you recall, we've got a couple of assumptions that define the way this market operates. And one of those assumptions is that we have firms that are price takers, right? Which means that an individual firm that operates within this market takes every single unit they sell and has to sell it at whatever the market determine the price to be. They have to take that market price as a given. The individual firm has no ability to influence this market price. So what does that mean? I'm going to pull that over here for a second, and then I'm going to hop down here and explain through this chart. If we think about this firm and their revenue story down here, if, and it looks like the price in this market is about $60, if P star is $60 in this market, then I can really quickly fill in this table that relates the quantity the individual firm would sell, their total revenue, and our new idea of marginal revenue. Quantity, this is saying if this firm sells one unit, sells 0, 1, 2, 3 units. If they sell 0 units at a price of $60, well, they're not selling anything, so they're not going to bring in any revenue. If they sell 1 unit, they have to sell that unit, by assumption, for the market equilibrium price of $60. 1 unit at a price of $60, total amount of money coming in, that's what total revenue represents, $60. 2 units. They're going to have to sell each of those 2 units at whatever the market determined the price to be, because again, they're price takers. So 2 units at $60 each, total amount of money coming in, $120. And then 3 units, $180, right? So you can see, by the assumptions that we made about the structure of a perfectly competitive market, it must be that they're price takers, and thus their total revenue is always going to increase by whatever the market determined the price to be, because they have no ability to change market prices. Marginal revenue formally is the change in total revenue divided by the change in Q. So we can see, right, for that first unit sold, what does the firm get from that first unit sold? Their revenue increases by $60. For the second unit sold, their revenue increases by another $60. For the third unit, their revenue increases by another $60. Notice, for a firm in a perfectly competitive market, their marginal revenue is equal to whatever the market price is. If I ask you to graph out the marginal revenue for the firm in a perfectly competitive market, notice it would look like this flat line that's flat and equal to whatever the market determined the price to be. This horizontal line equal to the P star in the market, that would be the marginal revenue for the firm in a perfectly competitive market. That's marginal revenue. So now we have the 2 sides of the story. We've got marginal cost, which tells me for each of those individual units, what's it going to cost this business? And marginal revenue tells me for each of those individual units, what's it going to cost, or what are they going to bring in? What's the revenue? So we can consider that first unit that's made. The additional revenue, what they bring in, is greater than the cost. Do they want to make that unit? Of course they do. Do they want to make the second unit, and the third unit, and the fourth unit? They want to make all of these additional units up till what point? Do they want to make this unit right here? Sure they do. They make very little profit on it, but they want to keep expanding output out to the point right there where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That is the quantity that's going to maximize the firm's profit. As a thought experiment, think about why the firm would not want to go beyond that point, right? They would bring in some revenue for those additional units that are produced, but the cost of producing those units would outstrip the revenue that's brought in from them. How would the firm pay for them? Well, they'd have to dip into their profits. They would never want to go beyond that intersection point. They want to produce where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. In a way, this story about marginal revenue, marginal cost parallels your decision to study for an exam, right? If you think about it hour by hour, geez, what do you get out of your first hour of studying? But also, what do you have to give up from your first hour of studying? If you're studying rationally, then you're going to compare the additional benefit of another hour of studying against what you have to give up, the additional cost of studying. And if you're rational, which is a big if you're rational, you're going to keep studying right up to the point where the gains are justified by the cost of what you have to give up from that last additional hour of studying.